Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Steps podcast. I'm Lou, and I am delighted to be hosting this podcast. This is a space where we share our experiences and reflections of entering into the Steps process. Steps, if you don't know, is a 12-week journey towards freedom, which is based on the well-known 12-step process, and this one is centered on the Christian faith. We often assume that 12-step programs are only for people with obvious addictions such as drugs and alcohol, but here we reveal how using these 12 steps can bring about profound hope and change at a personal level, no matter what addiction, behaviour or thought pattern is holding us back. Every episode, we share and reflect on the raw and unfiltered personal journeys of three participants, Jamie, Lars and me, Lou. We share how we began, grew and are still very much growing in this journey towards inner peace and freedom. In this episode, we are focusing on step 5, which is we admitted to God, to ourselves and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. So Lars, how did you feel coming to step 5?
Well, I was very fearful when I came to step 5. I was dreading it because simply saying out loud to someone else that I was struggling with pride and that it had these consequences both for myself and for others was a scary thought for me. And I was still very much in the pride complex, so to speak. So as a Christian leader at that time, I know it sounds really ridiculous now, but I had the thought that if I say this to anyone in Denmark, they will find it so interesting that they wouldn't be able to keep the secret and they would share it to everyone else. I know it's stupid, but that's really, those kind of thoughts went through my mind. And I felt like then my leadership profile is over and done with and so on. So I think I alluded to it earlier on that I actually ended up going to Sweden and to give my confession to a Swedish pastor, which was then a really good experience. But coming into it, I really had a lot of fears.
So you left the country to do your confession?
Yeah, isn't that ridiculous? But I did.
Well, it's understandable because it's so easy to carry this kind of feeling that we need to put our best selves forward. And if we're really open and vulnerable, then that means we're weak. And so I totally get that. And I really relate to that as well. Jamie, how about you? What were your thoughts and feelings when you started step 5?
Well, I think on reflection, I was in a state where probably with my family, I'd be really happy to be vulnerable. And I think, Lars, you mentioned something about on a podcast I heard you speak on about the difference between sharing our wounds and sharing our scars. So I'd be really happy to share my scars about the things that were dealt with, healed up, sorted, or almost the victory story. Yeah, I would share my wounds with my family, but I definitely had for a very, very long time, and it was linked to this vow that I'd made that I wouldn't express limitation, had decided I will not share my wounds with people. And I think part of that was hiding, part of that was the fear I don't want to be disempowered, because if I share my wounds and my real limitations, actually I'm going to be disempowered and I won't look so strong. So there was that going on. But interestingly, through doing step 5 and through confessing to another person, that brought immense healing and brought some real walls down, because it took me out of that hiding place into saying, actually, these are wounds, these are things that are going on right now. This is where I'm really struggling, and I'm not going to pretend. And I think as well, probably in the process, there was a sense of, wow, this is bringing me out of my head space. This is concrete. I'm going to be talking to a person. This is an event. That was really helpful, because I think a lot of the transformation that I was seeking was very much in my own head, and it was very much within my own thoughts. And I think step 5 said, no, actually, that, yeah, I'm going to confess to myself and to God and another human being. That was huge. And it really made it, this is an event.
Well, I guess it brought community into the process, didn't it? It's not just a process that we do by ourselves. It's one that we do within a group context and in community. I felt really similarly. I didn't actually have too much of a problem with confessing to God because I'd done that before and I was quite comfortable with that. Confessing to myself felt a bit difficult, but the idea of confessing to someone else and them hearing what's been going on in the inside, I think I just felt so much shame. I don't think I realized it at the time. At the time, I felt like, oh, this is quite overwhelming and a bit embarrassing. Look at my long list. But now I look back, I can think actually I felt really ashamed for some of the thoughts and the coping mechanisms that I'd employed to try and deal with my fear of rejection. And the funny thing was, when I actually confessed to my facilitator, I really felt this sense of freedom as I did it. It was like the power of the thoughts and the power of the behaviors had broken in the moment that I said it out loud. And then I was responded to with love. And actually, my facilitator suggested that I'd probably been a little bit difficult on myself and she suggested maybe you just need to confess that you've been too hard on yourself. And in that moment, I really felt the shame break away in a really powerful way.
I really relate to that. I remember doing a kind of leap of joy when I came out from the Swedish confession room. So I really relate to what you say, Lou, that part it's just amazing, isn't it? And of course, I've done it many times since. And I think every time there's something amazing about receiving the forgiveness of sins, just admitting that something really is a sin in the sense of I've missed the target, I've missed the purpose, I've missed what the value set on my life really by doing this, saying this, or not doing this and that. The part that I found really difficult, and I'm curious because you obviously also found it a bit difficult, Lou, but to be honest, the part of confessing to oneself, and I wrote the book, I cheated on that one. I didn't do it. The first 3 years, I simply didn't do it. So it's hilarious. I also allow other people to do it because I kind of knew that this is right, but I didn't do it myself until I had an experience of suddenly realizing it was a thought coming like a piercing arrow to my mind. I was sitting one afternoon having a cup of tea and a cheesecake. I still remember how that was. And then suddenly the thought pierced through my mind, are you being a good friend to yourself? And I just started crying. And I remember people around me, they were looking suspiciously at the cheesecake and thought, and this was a silent retreat, so I couldn't explain to them nothing is wrong with the cake. There's something else going on the inside. So that was really a moment of revelation to me, really, when it comes to the peace with yourself part of this process. So I had kind of done the theory until that point, but then it became real. And it happened just around this place in the process. I was around this place. So suddenly the confessing to myself became a huge thing, a big thing. Realizing that I have to treat myself with dignity. I have to treat myself as valuable as I do with other people. Somehow I had gotten that wrong, that I was kind of duty bound to treat other people with respect, care, and love, but not myself. So that was really a moment and a new approach to the confessing to myself.
I found, I agree. I found it really difficult. And one visualization exercise that I did, which really helped me, was I closed my eyes and I pictured myself sitting in a chair opposite me. And I pictured what I was wearing, what I looked like, my facial expression, my body language. And I apologized to myself for how hard I'd been on myself, and I confessed. And it was almost like I could see my whole countenance change as I confessed, and my body language changed, and kind of I looked myself in the eye, and it was a really powerful way of giving myself dignity, like you talked about. And it's so easy to miss that part of the process, isn't it? Because you think, or I thought, oh, what's the point? It's only me, it doesn't matter. But actually, when I did it, it was really powerful. Jamie, what were your experiences of confessing to yourself, God, or other people?
I think I was really comfortable with confessing to God, and I think that was partly, again, because of over responsibility. I think my relationship with God was a little dysfunctional. So this whole thing of I'm responsible for, I chose, no excuses. So I was really there was a lot of comfort in that. And even, I suppose, confessing to myself, I have done that to myself, I've hurt myself. Yeah, I think, looking at it, I'm not sure if I really had a very clear understanding of the God I was confessing to. I think strangely, I might have felt that the more hard I was on myself, the more I'm appeasing God and not seeing his compassion, his mercy, his empathy, his love, his kindness. So those two things actually needed to be worked on, confession to self and confession to God, because that was part of the process that needed to be healed. But definitely one of the most profound moments was when I heard it doing step 4, that thing of God saying, actually, you made a vow. And he was very specific about when I'd made it. And I knew when he said the date, I remember making it, that I would not express limitation, frailty, or weakness to another person. And that I would be strong and stoical and sacrificial. And he said that was a wrong vow. And so that thought had come, but it was in the confession to another person when I said, I'd made this vow, I'd made this confession that I would not express limitation or embrace the gift of limits. It was in that moment, in saying it and confessing it to another human, that the real weight of it came. And how that had affected me, really deeply affected me, how that had actually affected my view of God, how that had affected my relationships with other people, really, really came home in the moment of confessing it to a person. And it was out of that real, tangible, practical, transformative decisions started to flow, because it touched me on a deeply spiritual level. Whereas I think sometimes my confession to myself, or even to God, was just touching my intellect, my mind. It wasn't deeply affecting my gut, my emotions.
I really relate to what you're saying, Jamie, also in terms of the whole image of God involved in this. And I mean, I was at that point used to saying sorry to God for many things. And I remember also being a little bit, well, I've said sorry many times. So is this just another, trip around the same circle? But it wasn't. It was different, because the new thing was really more about how also have this affected, this pride, how has it affected my relationship with God? And the whole realization, actually, that God loves me so much and cares so much about the relationship that I can actually hurt God in the way that I treat him. So that was news. And I realized that I had, on the heart level, carried this image of God always being a little bit displeased with me, always wanting a little bit more, always asking me to do a little bit better or much better. In other words, I had made my own inner voice identical with the voice of God, alluding it to him. And I realized how wrong that was, how unfair that was, and had to say sorry for that, which was new. And I think it actually was connecting to this starting to treat myself with dignity, and see the value of myself. Because if I don't see the value of myself, if I don't treat myself with dignity, then I don't believe that what I do in relationship to God has any meaning to him. But as soon as I do, then relationships become a real relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense.
And I definitely felt like you, Lars, that there was an erroneous conscience that was driving so much of my relationship with myself, with God, and with others. And I think one of the fruit of the process has been a greater humility to not trust every thought that I have and every conclusion that I come to, and to be actually really open to the kindness and clarity of God.
This reminds me of how important it is for me to remember, at least, how we so often need to go back to step 2 and step three, like, what is my view of God? Like, who is the God that I'm confessing to? Is it the God that I've kind of built up in my mind, or assumed things of that just aren't true, that don't match reality? And one of the times that this really came through for me was actually after step 5. So I on the first time I did step 5 on a Saturday, and I felt this freedom, but then by Monday I felt terrible. I had a really hard time, and I think, and I guess I just want to normalize how normal that is. Sometimes we have, or I've had these step 5s which have felt amazing and like I've been really free, and then other times I've done it and not really felt anything. And this particular time I did it and had quite a tough time. And in those few days, I questioned, like, have I been forgiven? Like, was that confession really real? Because why am I having such a hard time spiritually? And I kind of didn't sense God in the same way. And I think that can be a really normal experience. Lars, have you ever experienced that? And what did you make of it when you did?
Oh, definitely. I do think that's a quite normal experience. In a way, this 5 days a mountain experience, isn't it? It's an amazing view. Well, often it is. And if it isn't for yourself, then you observe other people who have this experience, which is very joyful as well. But then you wake up, as you say, Lou, Monday morning, and realize, oh, I still carry the frailty within me. I still sense these thoughts coming my way, and so on, which of course is what leads us into the next part of the process. So what you are saying is the actual reason why the process doesn't stop at step 5. We need more in the journey of recovery. So in my experience, often when I then come into that phase of the process, that's often, I think, the hardest part of the process, because you kind of have experienced all of these great things in the steps leading up to steps 6 and 7, where we look at, so what can I do to change this behavior? Because something needs to be done. God does his bit, but I also need to do my bit. And obviously it doesn't, it's not fixed in the course of a day. It takes time and all of those things, which for many of us is a hard thing to realize. So that's emotionally a bit tough to go through. But then again, when we then are through that phase and enter into step 8 and 9, then typically it feels very different again. So it's interesting how our emotional journey is very real in this process. What I think I have learned along the way is probably a bit like what you're saying, Jamie, if I hear you right, not only when it comes to thoughts, but also emotions, not to trust them too much, not in a way to tell them, you're not giving me the full picture of this. I am more than what I feel right now, and I am more than what I think right now. So, which I have found really helpful when I go through this process.
It's very humbling, isn't it? It's a good reminder about staying in the process. And actually, my view, if I'm not careful, is like, I want the confession to be the point where I'm completely fixed, and then I can just go on my merry way. And actually, it's not about that. It's about being in the process. And I find freedom when I'm in the process rather than kind of being fixed and then going off and living my life.
It's an interesting thing with this step 5 and confession, isn't it? Because instinctively we would say that, oh, that's a really a low point. Now I am kind of putting words on how bad I have been, all the bad stuff, when at least spiritually speaking, it's the direct opposite happening. I am rebuilding relationships, really, doing my confession. And so that's one part of it. And the other part is really, it's a declaration of the dignity, the purpose, and the essence of who I am as a human being, that I am made for more than this stuff that has been going on for too long in my life, whatever that is, emotional or thought-wise or habits. There's something really great about that. I sometimes need to remind myself about that when I'm in this part of the process, because emotionally we can be tricked into, how miserable it is that I'm here again, I need to confess this and that. But it's actually speaking another message, which is extremely hopeful to us as human beings. And I really believe it's general. It's not just for him or her or them. It's for us as human beings, that we have such an amazing essence that we were created with. And confession actually reminds us of that. And we are getting readjusted or retuned, or however we phrase that, back into that essence again.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's a big one, confession, isn't it? There's so many layers to it, and it's such a powerful act that we can do. Jamie, what encouragement would you give to someone who is at the point of confession, step 5?
Well, one of the things I would encourage that person with is the person they're confessing to is also in the process, and they themselves have confessed to someone else the realities of their stuff, that's what makes this process so powerful. It's not, here's an expert who's so far ahead of you, who's going to judge you, but here's a person, another human being on exactly the same journey as you are. So I think that's why when you go into, as it were, the room to confess to another person, you do find someone with compassion and with love and with empathy and with mercy and kindness, because they themselves have done it, which I think is really powerful. So I would say that's a huge thing to know, that as this takes place, it's not judgment that the person's going to find. It's not finger pointing. It's going to be love, grace, and compassion. And I think that's a powerful, tangible experience, say from the Christian perspective, that this person is authorized by Jesus to be a representative of Jesus to another human being and to express his heart to that person in a tangible way. So I would say, yeah, be bold, be brave, because who you'll meet will be someone who will really want to love you well and serve you well.
Lars, how about you?
Well, I just loved what Jamie said. So in a way, I would like that just to stand. So maybe just sum it up in one sentence. You're not alone in this. Quite the contrary.
Very true. And I think I would say, don't shortcut confessing to yourself. or the other two either, but actually take time on it, because it is a really powerful act. And whether that's going to have a cheesecake like Lars, it's a really, really important part of the process to make that confession to yourself, because I think we can so easily carry a lot of self-condemnation. I know I do as well. So to prioritize ourselves and be a good friend to ourselves by doing that is a really important way to give ourselves dignity. Well, it's been great talking about step 5. Next time we're going to be doing 6, which was we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Deep. Lars, why don't you say the serenity prayer as we close?
Very happy to. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change. Courage to change the things we can. And wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Amen. Well, thanks, and we'll see you next time.